Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how you doing? Grab your coffee, maybe a snack or two, and let's get into it. So, what we're going to talk about right now is something that affects not just people in third world countries, but is also affects us here in the US. There are hundreds of millions of people that are desperately hungry all over the world. And sad to say this, but by the time you are done watching this video, more children will have starved to death. Earlier this year, CNN actually admitted that we are in the midst of the worst food crisis in modern history. But it's because the mainstream media rarely features images of the tremendous suffering on the other side of the globe. Most Americans, they don't even know what's really happening. Here in the Western world, the primary way that the global food crisis is manifesting is through significantly higher prices at the grocery store. Those higher prices are certainly painful, but quite a few of us can actually deal with it. But when you don't have enough food to feed your family on a consistent basis, that really is a nightmare scenario. According to the official UN website, 735 million people were in a state of chronic hunger last year. 735 million. By 2022, approximately 735 million people, or 9.2% of the world's population, found themselves in a state of chronic hunger, a staggering rise compared to 2019. This data underscores the severity of the situation, revealing a growing crisis. In addition, an estimated 2.4 billion people faced moderate to severe food insecurity in 2022. This classification signifies their lack of access to sufficient nourishment. And this number escalated by an alarming 391 million people that was compared to 2019. Now, this persistent surge in hunger and food insecurity, fueled by a complex interplay of factors, demands immediate attention and coordinated global efforts to alleviate this critical humanitarian challenge. We have never seen numbers like this before. And the final numbers for 2023 will inevitably be higher because crops are failing all over the planet. For example, this has been a catastrophic year for rice crops in India. The government of India responded to this crisis by banning the export of non-basmati white rice. But this has created a massive problem for dozens of countries that rely on rice exports from India. Did you know that more than 3 billion people worldwide, they rely on rice as a staple food, and India contributed to about 40% of global rice exports? Did you know that? And in the next day or so, I'm going to be doing a video on something called rice hoarding. And I know you're probably going to get a chill go up your spine because I said the word hoarding. But what we do, and as preppers and stuff like that, it's another classification, but there's a reason why I use that word hoarding, okay? And I'll explain it in that video. Without rice exports from India, the number of people that starve in poor countries in Africa and the Middle East is going to soar. Some impoverished nations are literally begging India to start exporting non-basmati white rice again, but so far the government, they're not budging. No. So The price of rice has been surging all over the world, and supplies are getting tighter and tighter. So I'm going to ask you a question right now, and I want you to honestly answer me, and I want you to put your answer in the comment section. And this is probably going to trigger you, and that's okay, because when I asked myself this same question, I instantly got triggered, and I said, what the hell? I don't ever want to see this happen. What would you do if your child was wasting away from malnutrition right in front of your eyes? What would you do? And I want you to answer me honestly. Okay? And I know as moms and dads, aunts, uncles, grandparents, we would go to any length. We would even not feed ourselves just so our children could eat. And I understand that. Did you know that in Somalia, this is actually happening to half of all the children under the age of 5? And I know you're probably thinking, well, what the hell? We don't live in Somalia. What the hell do I care? You're going to want to care, because guess what? Just because it's happening in another place does not mean that it cannot and it will not happen here. So I want you to pay attention. In Somalia, families are facing a catastrophic food crisis. And this is the result of a severe and prolonged drought and decades of conflict that have destroyed crop production and made it almost impossible for herders to find food for their animals. Now, unfortunately, the most vulnerable are children, of course, and the elderly as well. You cannot forget about them. But 50% of children under 5 in the country are experiencing acute malnutrition. Now, here in the Western world, our children are not starving per se. So, obviously, let's be thankful for that. But the lines at our food banks are getting longer and longer and longer. One food pantry went from seeing 940 families per month since the end of February, when the COVID era SNAP benefits were halted. Remember that? Now they're seeing an average of over 300 families a day coming in. So imagine a food pantry that services maybe 940 families a month to servicing over 300 families a day. Okay? We are experiencing problems with our crops too. In the middle of the country, seemingly endless drought conditions have greatly affected corn crops this year. Lack of rain has hit crops very hard. In Missouri, for example, 40% of the state's corn crop was classified as poor or very poor, and this is according to a drought monitor. Iowa, the nation's top corn producer, is in the midst of its worst drought in a decade, with about 80% of the state in some measure of a drought. Now, prolonged drought has even reached the banks of Lake Superior, and parts of Wisconsin have the most severe drought designation for the first time since 1999 inception of the U.S. Drought Monitor. Now, unfortunately, we are still only in the very early stages of this new global food crisis. Multiple long-term trends will combine to make it impossible for us to feed everyone on the planet in the years ahead. You know, I mean, how many times have you watched a pageant on TV and the contestant says, "I want to end world hunger"? It's impossible. Our politicians know this, but they are being very quiet about our rapidly growing food crisis. Why? Because they don't want to alarm the general population. Everything's fine. We live in Fantasia over here. It's wonderful. Yay. But there's not going to be an escape. Hundreds of millions will not have food to eat tonight. They're going to bed hungry. Have you ever gone to bed hungry? And it won't be too long before the number of people that are facing chronic hunger exceeds 1 billion. So I want you to keep that in mind, okay? And I also want you to answer that question honestly. And if you don't want to leave it in the comment section, email me, okay? All right, guys, I'm out of here. I'll see you in the next one. You stay safe, you stay positive, you keep prepping, and as always, fearless. Ciao.